The night sky over the Moscow region forests at the end of 41 seemed not merely dark, but palpably dense, as if infused with ink, in which the entire familiar world had dissolved. The silence hanging over the snow-covered clearing was broken only by heavy, intermittent breathing and the creak of frozen metal. A slender figure in an overcoat, clearly too large for her shoulders, stood motionless at the binoculars of a stereoscopic rangefinder. The girl was only 19, and just 6 months ago her main concern had been preparing for exams at the philological faculty, her hands smelling of library dust and ink. Now, however, her fingers, calloused from the frost and gun oil, rested on the flywheels of a complex optical instrument. She was the eyes of the anti-aircraft battery. In her headphones, through the crackle of static, the observer's voice broke through, reporting the approach of an unidentified hum from the southwest. It was a sound impossible to mistake for anything else, a low, vibrating note that made the diaphragm tremble. Luftwaffe bombers were in the sky, laden with tons of explosives destined for the capital's residential areas. At that moment, between the sleeping city and the approaching catastrophe, stood only them, yesterday's schoolgirls and students to whom fate had handed the keys to the sky. None of them, at that second, thought of heroism. Their thoughts were occupied only with parallax, lead angle, and wind speed. The situation that led these girls to anti-aircraft guns was dictated by the harsh, relentless logic of total war, which by the spring of 42 had reached its critical peak. The enormous losses of the first months of confrontation and the colossal length of the front created an unprecedented personnel shortage in the ranks of the active army. Men were vitally needed at the front, in the trenches, in tank helmets, at the controls of fighter planes. However, the rear, industrial giants, railway hubs, and strategic bridges could not remain defenseless against German aviation, which still retained significant power and ability to inflict painful blows. A dilemma arose, the solution of which required a revision of centuries-old military traditions. The State Defense Committee adopted a historic resolution on the mobilization of Komsomol girls into air defense units to free up men for deployment to the front. This was not just a replacement, it was the creation of an entirely new military caste. It was planned to call up over 100,000 women, and this scale in itself indicated that the war had crossed a line beyond which gender differences were erased in the face of a common threat. The transition from civilian life to army reality happened swiftly, with no time for lengthy adaptation or reflection. Echelons carried the girls away from their mothers and warm apartments to cold training centers, where they were to accomplish the impossible. In 1.5 to 2 months, master specialties that in peacetime would take years to learn. Instructors, who initially viewed the recruits with skepticism and even pity, were soon forced to change their minds. The girls demonstrated astonishing perseverance and attention to detail. Anti-aircraft warfare, unlike infantry combat, is primarily about mathematics, geometry, and physics. To shoot down an airplane flying at an altitude of 5,000 meters at a speed of 400 kilometers per hour, simply aiming is not enough. One must calculate a complex equation of motion, account for the projectile's ballistic trajectory, wind corrections, air density, and charge temperature. The girls' neatness and meticulousness here proved not to be a drawback, but a strategic advantage. They memorized the material part of 85mm cannons and anti-aircraft artillery fire control devices until the diagrams began to appear in their dreams at night. The process of combat work on the battery itself was a complex choreography, where every movement was perfected to automatism and subjected to a single rhythm. The main tool in their hands became the powerful 85mm anti-aircraft gun Model 39. It was a formidable but heavy weapon. The shell weighed about 16 kilograms. The loader had to grab this icy piece of steel, run to the gun, and without losing a second, ram it into the breech. The norm required a high rate of fire, and in the midst of an attack, the girls had to carry hundreds of kilograms of metal on their fragile shoulders. Blood would stream from their noses from overexertion, the skin on their palms would crack, but the rate of fire did not drop. The external conflict here manifested in the confrontation between human flesh and a ruthless mechanism. Iron knew no mercy. It demanded strength, and the girls found this strength in the reserves of their bodies, whose existence they had not even suspected before. During intense raids, when the sky turned into a fiery mess, the crews worked in a state close to a trance, where consciousness shuts down and only reflexes, hammered in by hours of training, operate. But the war in the sky was not limited to artillery alone. Searchlight operators and sound locators played a huge role. Working with a sound locator required unique psychophysical data. The operator, wearing huge headphones connected to the giant acoustic horns, had to distinguish the hum of enemy engines from the thousands of night sounds. The rustle of the wind, the whisper of leaves, the distant barking of dogs. This required absolute concentration and a musical ear. Often, girls with musical education or fighters blind from birth were selected for these positions, their heightened perception of sound becoming a formidable weapon. They heard the enemy tens of kilometers away, determined the type of aircraft, its altitude and course, when it was still an invisible dot in the night sky. A sound locator's error meant that the searchlight would turn on in the wrong place. The beam would miss the target, and the anti-aircraft guns would fire into the void while bombs rained down on the protected object. It was a confrontation of senses and technologies, where the human ear competed with German engineering geniuses who created engines with a special operating mode. The psychological landscape of female anti-aircraft gunners' lives was cut by deep trenches of internal contradictions. Finding themselves in an exclusively male world, they were forced to fight for their dignity and the right to be heard. At first, the attitude of commanders and male comrades in arms ranged from paternalistic care to dismissive distrust. They were called the Skirt Battalion, and jokes were made about their attempts to create comfort in the dugout. But this irony shattered against the first real battle. When men saw these girls standing under shrapnel, not ducking their heads, how they calmly tracked a target while bombs exploded around them, skepticism gave way to deep, silent respect. The internal drama also unfolded in the plane of self-perception. The war tried to erase the woman in them, to turn them into a standardized combat unit number such and such. Rough boots, footcloths, a stiff greatcoat, a short haircut, all of this worked to depersonalize them. But the girls resisted this process with amazing persistence. In between raids, in damp dugouts, embroidered napkins appeared, wildflowers in shell casings, mirrors hidden in the pockets of their tunics. This was not just coquetry, it was a form of psychological defense, a way to maintain a connection with the world for which they had, in fact, taken up arms. The philosophical aspect of this confrontation was rooted in fundamental questions of human existence. The woman, giver of life, became the one who ended it. This paradox lay heavily on the soul of every anti-aircraft gunner. They did not see the faces of their enemies like infantrymen in hand-to-hand combat. Their enemy was a machine, a silhouette, a black dot in the sky. but they knew that living people sat inside this machine. When a downed plane, leaving a smoky trail, crashed to the ground and a pillar of fire rose above the horizon, the joy of victory inevitably mixed with a deep, almost subconscious horror at the fact of destruction. However, the ideology of that time and the cruelty of the enemy transformed this feeling. German pilots were not perceived simply as enemy soldiers. They were carriers of absolute evil, which came to destroy homes, families, the very right to exist. Eliminating an enemy ace became an act of supreme justice, a cleansing of the sky from defilement. This understanding helped reconcile female nature with the craft of war, creating a new ethic where the defense of life demanded toughness and ruthlessness. The transformation of consciousness occurred gradually but irreversibly. The turning point was often the first downed plane or the first loss of a friend. At that moment, the romantic haze, if it still remained for anyone, disappeared, and a cold, professional understanding of war as a job came. One of the most intense points was the Stalingrad sky. There, the density of fire and aviation reached such scales that the concept of day and night blurred. The anti-aircraft gunners of the 1077th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Regiment, consisting predominantly of girls, did what seemed unthinkable. They engaged in battle not only with aviation but also with German tanks that had broken through to the tractor factory. Lowering the barrels of their anti-aircraft guns for direct fire, they struck at armor without any infantry support. In that battle, a final turning point in perception occurred. They ceased to be girls at war and became simply warriors, in no way inferior to men in either courage or skill. This episode went down in history as an example of absolute self-sacrifice, when crews died but did not leave their guns, turning their positions into impregnable fortresses. The technical evolution of the confrontation also did not stand still. The Luftwaffe, encountering a dense wall of anti-aircraft fire, changed tactics. They switched to night raids, used gliding bombs, varied altitude echelons, and approached from the direction of the sun. The anti-aircraft gunners had to learn faster than the enemy. New firing methods appeared, such as barrage firing over areas, where batteries created a cube of explosions in the sky, flying into which meant certain death. Interaction with fighter aviation and air observation, warning, and communication troops was improved. Female signalers, sitting on the roofs of high-rise buildings with binoculars, transmitted data to command posts at such a speed that only a few seconds passed from the moment the target was detected to the first salvo. This gigantic, invisible network, woven from female voices in telephone receivers and over the radio, became the nervous system of the country's air defense. The culmination of efforts and skill came during moments of massive raids on key rear area targets, such as the Gorky automobile plant or crossings over the Volga. On such nights, the sky turned into a dazzling dome of searchlight beams. Female searchlight operators fought a desperate duel with the pilots. Catching a plane with a beam was an art. The pilot, blinded by light with a power of millions of candles, lost orientation and began to thrash about. If a beam captured a target, neighboring searchlights immediately joined it, forming a cone of light, the apex of which was the enemy bomber. Tracers of anti-aircraft shells immediately rushed into this light trap. The roar was such that commands had to be given by gestures or shouted directly into the ear. The sense of time disappeared. Only the conveyor remained. Shell, breach, shot, casing. And so for hours. When the raid ended and a ringing silence descended, many collapsed from exhaustion right by the gun carriages, unable to take another step. But the factory continued to work, the bridge stood, the city lived. This was their victory, quiet, without fanfare, measured not by captured kilometers but by preserved objects. One of the most dramatic aspects of service was working with barrage balloons. Huge, rubberized sausages filled with hydrogen hung over cities, creating a deadly threat for low-flying aircraft. The steel cables on which they were held could cut through a fighter's wing like butter. The girls from the barrage balloon units performed titanic physical work, lifting and lowering the balloon, its maintenance, repairing the envelope, working with explosive hydrogen. All this required extraordinary strength and caution. In bad weather with strong winds, the balloon turned into a wild beast, tearing into the sky. There were cases when girls, who failed to unclip the hawser, were lifted into the air along with the balloon. Holding these sky guardians was a daily feat of endurance. Furthermore, the balloons were a priority target for German fighters. When a "1" attacked a helpless balloon with incendiary bullets, the crew on the ground had to instantly decide to save the expensive equipment by quickly lowering it, or to save themselves from the falling, burning torch. Often they chose the former, risking severe burns. The resonance of this unique chapter in military history is still felt, although for a long time it remained in the shadows. After the end of hostilities, most of the girls returned to civilian life, took off their uniforms, and fell silent. Society wanted to forget the horrors of war, and women needed to build families, raise children, reclaim their stolen youth. Talking about how they carried shells and saw torn bodies was not customary, and even frightening. It was believed that war was not a woman's business, and their participation was perceived as a forced, temporary measure that was best not to recall at the festive table. But it is precisely in this silence that the deepest lesson for our time is hidden. The history of anti-aircraft gunners shows that the potential of the human spirit has no gender boundaries. In extreme conditions, when the survival of the nation is at stake, social constructs and stereotypes crumble to dust. Women proved that they are capable of mastering the most complex technology and enduring extreme psychological stress without losing their humanity. Today, looking back, we see not just the statistics of downed aircraft, which are impressive in themselves. Thousands of enemy machines met their end thanks to female hands. We see a history of overcoming, a history of how fragility becomes stronger than steel. The modern world, where women successfully serve in the armies of many countries, pilot fighter jets, and manage complex systems, largely stands on the shoulders of those girls in oversized greatcoats. They paved this path, paying for it with their youth, health, and many with their lives. Their experience teaches us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. It is a lesson in responsibility. When the fates of thousands of strangers depend on your seemingly small action, turning a flywheel, adjusting a frequency, transmitting coordinates, you grow beyond yourself, becoming part of something larger. In the finale of this story, we once again return in our mind's eye to that very battery at the edge of the forest. The dawn of 45 arrives. The sky is clear, transparent, no longer holding a menacing hum. The guns are covered, their barrels pointing zenith, but peacefully now, like guardians who have fulfilled their duty. The same girl who, at the beginning of the war, tremblingly touched the cold steel, now stands confidently, her gaze aged by a lifetime. She removes her headset, and the wind ruffles her grown-out hair. Silence no longer frightens. It does not portend disaster. It is the silence of victory, forged, in part, by her hands. The war is over, but the memory of night watches, of searchlight beams crisscrossing in the clouds, of the weight of shells, and of friends who remained forever young will live in her always. She returns to the world she saved, but she will never be the same. History has come full circle, transforming yesterday's student into a veteran, and the deadly sky once again into a space for birds and sun. And in this peaceful sky, the invisible trace of their feet will forever remain, a silent reminder of who held it on their shoulders all those endless, fiery years.